The long, winding road that led to Pine Hollow was both familiar and foreign to Elena Michaels. As her car meandered through the dense forest, the towering pines casting long shadows across the asphalt, she felt a mixture of nostalgia and dread creeping up her spine. It had been years since she had last driven this road, years since she had left the town that held so many dark memories. She glanced into the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of her daughter, Lily, fast asleep in the backseat, her small hand clutching a stuffed bunny. Elena turned her attention back to the road, her grip tightening on the steering wheel as the trees parted to reveal an old, decrepit gas station in the distance. The sight of it made her breath catch in her throat. It was the same station from her childhood, the same one where she had nearly been taken by a man whose face she could never forget. The building was now more overgrown than she remembered, with vines snaking up its rusted pumps and broken windows staring out like hollow eyes. She swallowed hard and tried to push the memories away. That was a long time ago, she reminded herself. She was safe now, and so was Lily. But as the car rolled past the station, a cold shiver ran down her spine. For a brief moment, she thought she saw a figure standing in the shadows near the entrance, watching her car pass by. But when she blinked, the figure was gone, leaving her with only the lingering unease of something unfinished. Elena's eyes flickered back to the road as the gas station disappeared from view. The trees thinned out, and the road widened as they approached the outskirts of Pine Hollow. The town hadn't changed much in her absence. It was still the quiet, sleepy place she remembered. The houses were modest, with well-kept lawns and picket fences, and the air smelled of pine and earth. But the memories that clung to this place were not so easily forgotten. Her car rolled to a stop in front of the house where she had grown up, a two-story structure with weathered paint and an overgrown garden. She hadn't been back since her parents' funeral, and the sight of the house brought a lump to her throat. She turned off the engine and took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Mommy, are we here?" Lily's sleepy voice came from the back seat. Elena turned and smiled at her daughter, though her heart still pounded in her chest. "Yes, sweetie. We're home." The old house creaked in welcome as Elena pushed open the front door. The smell of dust and aged wood filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of lavender, her mother's favorite fragrance. Elena's eyes swept over the familiar interior, the worn furniture and faded wallpaper, evoking a wave of bittersweet nostalgia. It was as if time had stood still here, preserving the memories of her childhood, both good and bad. Lily bounded past her, excited to explore the new surroundings. "This house is big, Mommy," she exclaimed, her little feet pattering across the wooden floors. Elena followed her daughter into the living room, where her mother lay in a recliner, a blanket draped over her frail frame. The stroke had left her weak and unable to speak much, but her eyes lit up when she saw Elena and Lily. "Hi, Mom," Elena said softly, leaning down to kiss her mother's cheek. "We're here." Her mother's lips curled into a faint smile, her eyes shining with a mixture of relief and happiness. Elena could see the toll the stroke had taken on her, the once vibrant woman now a shadow of her former self. But despite her weakened state, her mother's presence brought a small measure of comfort to Elena. As Lily explored the house, Elena began the task of unpacking. She moved through the house, placing belongings in the rooms where they belonged, trying to make the place feel like home again. But the further she delved into the house, the more unsettled she became. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the walls seemed to echo with the ghosts of her past. While rummaging through an old box in her childhood bedroom, Elena stumbled upon a photograph. It was of her as a little girl, standing in front of the same gas station she had seen on the drive-in. Her heart skipped a beat as the memories of that day came rushing back. She remembered the man who had tried to take her, his cold smile and the way his hand had gripped her arm. She had been so close to disappearing forever, and the thought still made her stomach churn. Elena quickly shoved the photo back into the box, her hands trembling. She couldn't afford to dwell on the past, not now. She had to focus on the present, on taking care of Lily and her mother. But the unease she felt only grew stronger. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the house was bathed in the soft glow of the lamps, Elena busied herself with preparing dinner. She tried to shake off the unsettling memories from earlier, but they lingered at the edges of her mind, refusing to be ignored. As she stirred a pot on the stove, she heard Lily's voice coming from her bedroom. At first, she assumed Lily was playing with her toys, but then she realized her daughter was talking to someone. "Who are you talking to, sweetie?" Elena called out, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Lily's voice floated back down the hallway. "I'm talking to the nice man outside." Elena's heart skipped a beat, and she hurried down the hall to Lily's room. She pushed open the door to find her daughter sitting by the window, staring out into the darkening woods that bordered their backyard. "There's no one out there, Lily," Elena said, trying to keep her voice calm. She moved to the window and peered out, but all she saw were the tall, shadowy trees swaying in the evening breeze. Lily turned to her with a smile. "But he was there, Mommy. He was wearing a funny old suit, and his hair was all silver." Elena's breath caught in her throat. The description was too familiar, too close to the man who had haunted her nightmares for so long. She felt a cold sweat break out on her skin as she forced herself to smile. "It's just your imagination, sweetie," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "Why don't you come help me finish dinner?" Lily nodded and skipped out of the room, but Elena lingered by the window, her eyes scanning the darkened woods. She knew it couldn't be the same man. It had been years since that day. He was gone. He had to be. But as she stood there, staring into the shadows, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, waiting. That night, after Lily was tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Elena found herself tossing and turning, unable to sleep. The events of the day had stirred up memories she had buried. Deep memories that now clawed their way to the surface, demanding to be acknowledged. She finally drifted off into a restless sleep, only to be plunged into a vivid nightmare. She was back at the gas station, a small, frightened child standing by the pumps. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline, and the sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows across the ground. She could feel the man's presence before she saw him, his cold hand reaching out to grab her. But this time, the dream was different. Just as his hand closed around her wrist, a voice whispered in her ear, so faint she could barely make it out. "Never return." Elena jolted awake, her heart racing, her body drenched in sweat. She sat up in bed, gasping for breath, the dream still vivid in her mind. The voice had been so clear, so urgent, as if someone had been trying to warn her. She glanced at the clock on her bedside table. It was just past 3 a.m., the darkest hour of the night. She felt a sudden urge to check on Lily, to make sure she was safe. As she slipped out of bed and crept down the hall, she paused by the window at the end of the corridor. The woods loomed outside, dark and silent, but something caught her eye. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, just beyond the reach of the house's lights. It was tall, with broad shoulders, and a stillness that made Elena's blood run cold. She blinked, and the figure was gone, leaving her staring at nothing but shadows. Elena hurried to Lily's room and gently pushed the door open. Her daughter was sound asleep, her breathing even and peaceful. Relief flooded through Elena, but it was short-lived. The image of the figure in the woods lingered in her mind, refusing to be dismissed as just a trick of the light. She returned to her room, but sleep was impossible. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the nightmare and the figure in the woods. The voice in her dream echoed in her mind, "Never return." What did it mean? And why did she feel like she was walking straight into a danger she didn't understand? The next morning dawned grey and overcast, matching Elena's mood as she went about her morning routine. She couldn't shake the lingering unease from the night before, and her thoughts kept returning to the man Lily had described, the man who matched the one from her past so perfectly. As she sat at the kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee, there was a knock at the door. Her heart skipped a beat, and she set the cup down, wiping her hands on her jeans before heading to answer it. She opened the door to find Detective Jimmy Carter standing on the porch, his familiar face offering a small measure of comfort. He was dressed in his usual uniform, his expression a mix of concern and warmth. "Elena," he greeted her with a nod. "I heard you were back in town, and I thought I'd stop by to see how you're doing." Elena managed a smile, though it felt strained. "It's good to see you, Jimmy. Come on in." He stepped inside, and she led him to the kitchen, where they sat down across from each other. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken words, memories from the past that neither of them wanted to confront. "How's your mom?" Jimmy asked, his tone gentle. "She's hanging in there," Elena replied, her gaze drifting to the hallway where her mother's room was. "It's been tough, but we're managing." Jimmy nodded, understanding in his eyes. He glanced around the room, his gaze settling on an old photo on the wall. It was of Elena as a child, standing in front of the gas station. "That picture," he said slowly, "wasn't that taken the day?" Elena's heart skipped a beat. "Yes," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "That was the day he tried to take me." Jimmy's expression darkened. "I remember. Everyone in town does. But he's gone, Elena. He can't hurt you anymore." Elena wanted to believe him, but the events of the past day had shaken her to her core. "Lily said she saw someone outside last night," she admitted, her voice trembling. "She described him, and it was just like him, Jimmy. The same suit, the same silver hair." Jimmy's eyes narrowed. "Are you sure? It could have been a coincidence, maybe a trick of the light." "I don't know," Elena whispered, her hands trembling. "I just have this feeling, like something is watching us, waiting." Jimmy reached across the table and took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "We'll figure this out, Elena. I promise you, I'll do whatever it takes to keep you and Lily safe." Elena nodded, grateful for his support, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were dealing with something far beyond their understanding. Something that had followed her out of the past and into the present. As Jimmy left, he paused at the door and turned back to her. "If you notice anything else, anything at all, call me. Don't wait." "I will," Elena promised, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. But as she closed the door behind him, she knew that this was only the beginning. The past had found her again, and this time, she wasn't sure if she could escape it. The morning fog hung low over the town of Pine Hollow, wrapping the trees in a veil of grey as Elena Michaels watched Lily run through the backyard. The grass was still damp with dew, and the air carried a crispness that hinted at the changing seasons. Elena leaned against the kitchen doorframe, sipping her coffee and trying to shake off the unease that had settled over her since the previous night. Lily was playing near the edge of the woods, her laughter echoing in the quiet morning. Elena's eyes followed her daughter's every move, a protective instinct she couldn't suppress. The woods had always been a source of unease for her, even before her childhood encounter. Now, with Lily's talk of a nice man and the unsettling events of the past few days, that unease had turned into something closer to fear. "Lily, don't go too far," Elena called out, her voice carrying a hint of anxiety. Lily looked back at her mother with a reassuring smile. "I'm just playing, Mommy. I won't go far." Elena forced herself to smile back, but her grip tightened around the mug. She watched as Lily continued to run, her small figure darting between the trees at the edge of the property. The woods seemed to beckon, as if something within was calling out to her daughter. Elena could almost feel the pull, a sinister whisper that urged Lily deeper into the shadows. Suddenly, Lily stopped and stared into the forest. Elena's heart skipped a beat as she saw her daughter's expression change from joy to something more serious, almost as if she were listening to someone. Before Elena could call out again, Lily took a few tentative steps toward the woods. Elena's coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the ground. "Lily, stop," she shouted, fear lacing her voice. But Lily didn't stop. She took another step forward, her eyes wide and focused on something Elena couldn't see. Panic surged through Elena as she sprinted across the yard, her feet slipping on the wet grass. She reached Lily just as her daughter crossed the boundary into the trees. Elena grabbed Lily's arm, pulling her back with more force than she intended. "I said stop," she snapped, her voice trembling. Lily looked up at her, confusion and fear mingling in her eyes. "Mommy, I was just going to say him." "See who?" Elena demanded, her heart racing. "The nice man," Lily whispered, her gaze drifting back toward the woods. "He said he wants to play with me." Elena's blood ran cold. "There's no one there, Lily. It's just the woods." "But I saw him, Mommy," Lily insisted, her voice growing more desperate. "He was right there." Elena knelt down, cupping her daughter's face in her hands. "Lily, listen to me. You must stay away from the woods, okay? No matter what you see or hear, don't go near them." Lily nodded slowly, but Elena could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She pulled her daughter into a tight hug, feeling the pounding of her own heart against Lily's small frame. The fear that had been simmering within Elena now threatened to boil over. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and she didn't know how to stop it. The incident by the woods left Elena shaken, but she tried to keep up a facade of normalcy for Lily's sake. The rest of the morning passed uneventfully, with Elena doing her best to distract Lily with games and stories. But the tension never fully left her, and by afternoon, she was constantly checking the windows, her eyes drawn to the dark line of trees that bordered their backyard. It wasn't until later, when she was putting away laundry, that she noticed Lily had slipped away. Panic flared up inside her as she called out for her daughter, her voice echoing through the house. "Lily, where are you?" There was no answer. Elena's heart raced as she hurried through the house, searching every room, but Lily was nowhere to be found. The last place she checked was her daughter's bedroom, where the window stood open, a light breeze stirring the curtains. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She knew, with a sickening certainty, where Lily had gone. Without thinking, she bolted out of the house and into the backyard, her eyes frantically scanning the edge of the woods. She caught sight of a flash of color, a pink shirt, disappearing into the trees. "Lily, no!" Elena screamed, her legs propelling her forward into the forest. The moment she crossed the threshold into the woods, the atmosphere changed. The air grew cooler, and the trees seemed to close in around her, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sun. The ground beneath her feet was soft with moss, muffling the sound of her footsteps. Elena pushed through the underbrush, her heart pounding in her chest as she followed the faint sounds of Lily's footsteps ahead. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent her heart racing. The woods were dense and disorienting, the paths twisting and turning as if deliberately trying to confuse her. Finally, she stumbled into a small clearing, and there, in the center, stood the old gas station. The sight of it sent a jolt of terror through Elena. The building was more decrepit than ever, its walls caved in and covered with vines, the windows shattered and dark. But what terrified her more was the sight of Lily, standing just a few feet away from the entrance, her eyes wide and unblinking. "Lily!" Elena gasped, rushing forward. Lily didn't respond. She was staring at something just beyond the doorway, her expression blank, almost trance-like. Elena grabbed her daughter's arm, shaking her gently. "Lily, we need to go. Now." But Lily didn't move. Her gaze remained fixed on the entrance to the gas station, as if she were seeing something that Elena couldn't. "Mommy," Lily whispered, her voice distant. "He's here. He wants to talk to you." Elena's breath hitched. She followed Lily's gaze to the dark entrance of the gas station, and for a moment, she thought she saw a shadow shift within. Her heart pounded in her ears as she pulled Lily back, her hands trembling. "There's no one there," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We're leaving." As she turned to leave, she felt a cold, icy hand brush against her shoulder. She whipped around, but there was no one there, only the oppressive silence of the woods. The sensation lingered, sending a shiver down her spine. Elena didn't wait to see what else might be lurking in the shadows. She scooped Lily up into her arms and ran, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she navigated the twisting paths back to the house. The trees seemed to claw at her as she ran, their branches scratching at her skin, but she didn't stop until she burst out of the woods and into the sunlight. She didn't slow down until they were back inside the house. The door slammed shut behind them. Only then did she let Lily down, her legs shaking with the effort to remain standing. Lily looked up at her, confusion clouding her eyes. "Why are you scared, Mommy?" Elena knelt down, her hands still trembling as she cupped her daughter's face. "You need to stay away from the woods, Lily. Promise me you won't go in there again." Lily hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I promise." But Elena could see the uncertainty in her daughter's eyes, and it terrified her. The woods had taken hold of Lily in some way, and she didn't know how to break its grip. That night, after Lily was safely tucked into bed, Elena paced the living room, her mind racing. With everything that had happened, the fear that had been gnawing at her since their return to Pine Hollow had now taken root, growing stronger with each passing hour. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that the past was reaching out to claim her again. And this time, it was coming for Lily. Elena knew she couldn't face this alone. She needed answers that only someone who knew the town's history could provide. And there was one person who had always seemed to know more than most. She picked up her phone and dialed Detective Jimmy Carter's number. It rang twice before he answered, his voice laced with concern. "Elena, what's going on?" "I need your help, Jimmy," Elena said, her voice trembling. "It's happening again. The man, his back." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure?" "Elena, that man is gone. He can't." "I saw him," Elena cut in, her voice rising with desperation. "Lily saw him too. And there's something wrong with the woods. I don't know how to explain it, but I can feel it." Jimmy's voice was calm but firm. "Okay. I believe you. I'll come over first thing in the morning. And we'll figure this out together." Elena let out a shaky breath, relief flooding through her. "Thank you, Jimmy. Hang in there, Elena. We'll get to the bottom of this." After hanging up the phone, Elena felt a small measure of comfort. Jimmy had always been reliable, always there when she needed him. But as she stood in the quiet house, the shadows pressing in around her, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were dealing with something far beyond their understanding. She moved to the window and looked out into the backyard. The woods loomed dark and silent. A wall of shadows that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The fear gnawed at her, growing stronger with each passing moment. She knew she couldn't wait until morning. There were answers out there, hidden in the town's history, and she needed to find them before it was too late. Elena didn't sleep that night. She stayed up, poring over old newspaper clippings and records. She found in her mother's attic, desperate to find any information about the man who had nearly taken her all those years ago. But the more she searched, the more questions she uncovered. The records were sparse, with only a few vague references to similar disappearances in the area. Children who had vanished without a trace, their cases unsolved, their families left with nothing but grief and unanswered questions. The descriptions of the man were inconsistent, but they all shared one common detail: his silver hair and the way he seemed to appear and disappear like a ghost. It wasn't until she found a faded article from nearly 50 years ago that she began to piece together the truth. The article told the story of a man who had been accused of abducting several children, but who had mysteriously vanished before he could be brought to justice. His name was long forgotten, but the description matched the man who had haunted Elena's nightmares for years. Elena's hands trembled as she read the final paragraph of the article, which mentioned a local legend, one that spoke of a curse that plagued the town of Pine Hollow. According to the legend, the curse was tied to the land itself, to the woods that surrounded the town. It was said that every few decades, a malevolent spirit would rise, taking the form of a man who preyed on the town's children. The article hinted at a ritual that could break the curse, but the details were vague, lost to time and superstition. Elena's heart raced as she realized that the man who had tried to take her was not just a predator, but something far more sinister, a force that had been terrorizing Pine Hollow for generations. The fear that had been gnawing at her now erupted into full-blown terror. She had returned to Pine Hollow, thinking she could escape her past, but instead, she had walked right into the heart of the curse. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the window, Elena knew what she had to do. She had to find the truth, to uncover the ritual that could break the curse and save her daughter from the fate that had nearly claimed her all those years ago. But she also knew that she was running out of time. The shadows were closing in, and the thing was waiting. She could feel it watching her, just beyond the edge of the woods. And this time, it wasn't going to let her go so easily. The days that followed were a blur of fear and paranoia for Elena. After her sleepless night of research, she tried to resume a sense of normalcy, but the feeling of being watched never left her. The woods, once a place of childhood adventure, now loomed like a dark presence at the edge of her consciousness. She couldn't shake the growing dread that something terrible was about to happen. Lily, too, seemed to change. The bright, playful child who had once filled the house with laughter became quiet and withdrawn, spending more time by the windows, staring out at the woods. Elena's attempts to engage her were met with distant responses, as if Lily was no longer entirely present. One afternoon, Elena noticed strange symbols carved into the trees around their property, twisted, interlocking shapes that made her skin crawl. She had never seen anything like them before, and when she asked Lily if she knew anything about them, her daughter simply shrugged and said the nice man had shown them to her. The symbols appeared overnight, as if some malevolent force was marking its territory. The air around the house grew heavier, and the sounds of the forest, once comforting, now seemed distorted, with whispers carried on the wind that Elena couldn't quite make out. Elena knew she couldn't ignore what was happening any longer. The town's curse was no longer a legend, it was real, and it was tightening its grip on her family. But the more she tried to explain this to the people around her, the more isolated she became. The townspeople, already suspicious of Elena because of her past, began to distance themselves, whispering behind her back and casting accusing glances in her direction. Even Jimmy, who had been her steadfast ally, seemed unsure of what to believe. He had seen the symbols and the changes in Lily, but his rational mind struggled to accept the possibility of a supernatural curse. Despite his reservations, he agreed to help Elena uncover the truth, if only to put her fears to rest. But as they delved deeper into the town's history, they uncovered more than they bargained for. They found old records of disappearances, cases that were eerily similar to what was happening now. Each incident was marked by the appearance of the symbols and the presence of a mysterious figure who matched the description of the man Elena had seen. The weight of the past bore down on Elena as she realized the curse was cyclical, repeating every few decades. And now, it was her turn to face the horrors that had plagued Pine Hollow for generations. The tension in the Michaels household reached a breaking point one fateful afternoon when Lily disappeared. Elena had been in the kitchen, her nerves on edge as she prepared lunch, when she realized that the house was too quiet. The usual sounds of Lily playing or humming to herself were absent. "Lily," Elena called out, her voice echoing through the empty rooms. There was no answer. Panic set in as Elena rushed from room to room, searching for any sign of her daughter. Her heart pounded in her chest as she checked every corner, every hiding place, but Lily was nowhere to be found. The last place she looked was Lily's bedroom. The window was open, and the breeze fluttered the curtains, carrying with it the faintest hint of something rotten, something foul that made Elena's stomach turn. Her heart sank as she noticed that Lily's favorite stuffed bunny was missing from her bed, a sure sign that Lily had taken it with her. Without a second thought, Elena grabbed her jacket and bolted out the door, her mind racing with fear. She knew exactly where Lily had gone to the woods. The thought of her daughter alone in those dark, cursed trees filled Elena with terror. She sprinted across the yard, the symbols carved into the trees glaring at her like eyes. The closer she got to the edge of the woods, the more the air seemed to thicken, pressing down on her like a physical weight. "Lily," she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. "Lily, where are you?" There was no response, only the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Elena pushed her way into the woods, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The trees loomed tall and oppressive, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out the sun, plunging the forest floor into shadow. Elena's thoughts were a chaotic mix of fear and determination. She couldn't lose Lily, not like this. Not to the curse that had haunted her since childhood. As she ventured deeper into the woods, the sound of her daughter's voice reached her ears, faint and distant. It was coming from the direction of the old gas station. Elena's blood ran cold. She broke into a run, her legs carrying her through the twisted underbrush and uneven ground. Branches whipped at her face, tearing at her clothes, but she didn't care. All that mattered was finding Lily and getting her out of there. She burst into the clearing where the gas station stood, her heart hammering in her chest. There, standing in front of the dilapidated building, was Lily, holding her stuffed bunny and staring up at the darkened windows. "Lily!" Elena cried, rushing forward. Lily turned to face her mother, her expression blank, her eyes wide and unblinking. "He's here. Mommy," she said in a monotone voice. "He wants to play with me." Elena's stomach twisted with fear. She grabbed Lily by the shoulders, shaking her gently. "We're leaving, right now. Do you hear me? We're going home." But Lily didn't move. Her gaze remained fixed on the entrance to the gas station, as if she were in a trance. Desperation clawed at Elena's heart. She looked around frantically, searching for any sign of the thing that was trying to take her daughter. The clearing was empty, but the air hummed with an unseen presence, a malevolent force that seemed to be closing in on them. Elena knew she had to act fast. She scooped Lily up into her arms, holding her tightly as she turned to flee. But as she did, she felt a cold breath against her neck, followed by a whisper that chilled her to the bone. "You can't save her, Elena. She belongs to me." Elena screamed and broke into a run, carrying Lily away from the gas station as fast as her legs would carry her. The whisper followed them, growing louder, more insistent, until it was all she could hear. She didn't stop running until they were back at the house, slamming the door shut behind them. Elena set Lily down, her hands trembling as she locked every window and door, her mind racing with fear. Lily looked up at her mother, confusion clouding her eyes. "Mommy, why are you scared?" Elena knelt down, her voice shaking as she tried to explain. "Because I love you, Lily. And I'm not going to let anything happen to you." Lily nodded slowly, but Elena could see that her daughter didn't fully understand. The curse was trying to claim Lily, just as it had tried to claim her all those years ago. And Elena knew that she was running out of time to stop it. That night, Elena sat at the kitchen table, the weight of the day's events pressing down on her like a leaden shroud. She had barely touched her dinner, her appetite long gone. Lily was in bed, sleeping fitfully, and the house was unnervingly quiet. The symbols, the voice, the gas station, it all pointed to one thing. The curse was real, and it was trying to take her daughter. She knew she couldn't face this alone. She needed help, but more than that, she needed answers. There had to be a way to break the curse, to save Lily from the fate that awaited her. Elena picked up the phone and dialed the number of the old historian she had read about in the local newspaper archives, a man named Harold Whittaker. He was known for his knowledge of the town's history, and if anyone could shed light on the curse, it was him. The phone rang several times before a raspy voice answered. "Hello, Mr. Whittaker," Elena said, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. "My name is Elena Michaels. I need your help. It's about the curse, the one that's been haunting Pine Hollow." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You'd better come over," he finally said, his voice low and serious. "But be warned, Mrs. Michaels, the answers you seek may not be what you want to hear." Elena agreed and hung up the phone, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She grabbed her coat and quietly slipped out of the house, not wanting to wake Lily. The drive to Harold Whittaker's house was a short one, but it felt like an eternity. The darkness pressed in on all sides, and the road seemed to stretch endlessly before her. When she finally arrived at the historian's small, cluttered house, she hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door. Whittaker answered quickly, as if he had been expecting her. He was an elderly man, with a stooped back and white hair that framed a face lined with age and worry. His eyes, however, were sharp and piercing, as if they could see right through her. "Come in," he said, stepping aside to let her enter. Elena followed him into the dimly lit living room, where books and papers were strewn about in chaotic piles. Whittaker motioned for her to sit in a worn armchair, and she did so, clutching her coat tightly around her. "You've encountered it, haven't you?" Whittaker said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "The curse." Elena nodded, her throat tight. "It's after my daughter. I need to know how to stop it." Whittaker sighed, sinking into his own chair. "The curse is ancient, older than this town itself. It's tied to the land, to the woods. Every few decades, it awakens, seeking out the innocent to claim as its own." "But why?" Elena asked, her voice breaking. "Why does it take children?" "Because that's what it was born from, fear," Whittaker replied, his gaze distant. "A fear so deep and powerful that it became something more, something that feeds on the terror of others. It takes children because they are the purest form of fear, innocent, vulnerable, easy to manipulate." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "Is there a way to break it? To stop it from taking Lily?" "There is," Whittaker said slowly, "but it requires a great sacrifice. To break the curse, someone must willingly bind themselves to it, taking on its burden and preventing it from spreading to the next generation. But it's a fate worse than death, Mrs. Michaels. The person who binds themselves to the curse will become its vessel, trapped in an eternal nightmare." Elena's heart sank. She had hoped for a solution, but the reality of what it would cost was almost too much to bear. Could she do it? Could she sacrifice herself to save Lily, knowing that she would be condemning herself to a fate of unimaginable horror? Whittaker seemed to read her thoughts. "You're a mother, Mrs. Michaels. I know you would do anything to protect your daughter. But this is something no one should have to face." Elena swallowed hard, her mind racing. She knew what she had to do, but the fear of it threatened to overwhelm her. She looked up at Whittaker, her voice trembling. "How do I do it? How do I bind myself to the curse?" Whittaker's expression softened with sorrow. "There's a ritual, passed down through generations. It must be performed at the place where the curse is strongest, the old gas station. You'll need to make a blood offering and speak the words of binding. But once it's done, there's no going back." Elena's hands shook as she absorbed his words. "And if I don't do it?" Whittaker's eyes darkened. "Then the curse will take Lily, and it will continue to spread, claiming more lives until it's stopped." Elena nodded, her decision made. She would do whatever it took to save her daughter, no matter the cost. She stood, her legs weak but determined. "Thank you, Mr. Whittaker. I'll do it tonight." Whittaker watched her with a mixture of pity and respect. "You're a brave woman, Mrs. Michaels. I only wish there was another way." Elena forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "So do I." With that, she turned and left the historian's house, her mind set on the task ahead. The drive back to her home felt surreal, as if she were moving through a dream. But the fear gnawing at her insides reminded her that this was all too real. When she arrived home, she found Jimmy waiting for her on the porch, his face drawn with worry. "Elena, where have you been?" "I've been looking for you," he said, his voice edged with concern. "I had to find answers," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the fear threatening to consume her. "I know what I have to do to save Lily." Jimmy frowned, his eyes searching hers. "What are you talking about?" "There's a ritual," Elena explained, her voice trembling. "It's the only way to break the curse. I have to bind myself to it, to stop it from taking Lily." Jimmy's face paled. "Elena, you can't do this. There has to be another way." "There isn't," Elena insisted, tears welling in her eyes. "I have to protect her, Jimmy. I have to do this." Jimmy shook his head, his expression anguished. "I won't let you do this alone. I'll help you. Whatever it takes." Elena's heart ached at his words, but she knew this was something she had to face on her own. "No, Jimmy. This is my burden to bear. But I need you to watch over Lily, to make sure she's safe." Jimmy hesitated, his eyes filled with pain. "Elena, please. Promise me, Jimmy," Elena interrupted, her voice firm. "Promise me you'll protect her." Jimmy's shoulders slumped in defeat, and he nodded. "I promise." Elena swallowed hard, knowing she had made the right choice. She took one last look at Jimmy, memorizing the kindness and strength in his eyes, before turning to head into the house. She had only a few hours left before she would have to face the curse, and she intended to spend them with Lily, cherishing every moment before the inevitable. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, the air in Pine Hollow grew heavy with anticipation. The woods stood silent and still, as if the very trees were holding their breath, waiting for what was to come. Elena prepared herself for the ritual, her heart pounding in her chest. She had found an old knife in her mother's attic, a relic from a time long past, and now it lay heavy in her hand. The words of the ritual, ancient and foreboding, were etched into her memory. Lily was fast asleep in her room, unaware of the sacrifice her mother was about to make. Elena kissed her daughter's forehead one last time, her tears falling onto Lily's pillow. "I love you, Lily," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Always remember that." With that, she turned and left the house, the knife clutched tightly in her hand. The walk to the gas station felt like a march to the gallows, each step heavier than the last. When she arrived at the clearing, the gas station loomed before her, a dark silhouette against the night sky. The symbols carved into the trees seemed to glow with an eerie light, pulsing with the curse's malevolent energy. Elena took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she stepped forward. The air around her was thick with the scent of decay, and the whispers of the curse echoed in her ears. She knew what she had to do. With a steady hand, Elena made the first cut across her palm, the pain sharp and immediate. Blood welled up, dripping onto the ground, soaking into the earth that had been tainted by the curse. She spoke the words of the ritual, her voice strong and unwavering. As she did, the air around her seemed to shift, the darkness pressing in closer, as if the curse itself was responding to her call. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the shadows around her deepened, coalescing into a shape, a figure with silver hair and eyes that glowed with an unnatural light. The man, no, the curse, stood before her, a smile curling his lips. "You would sacrifice yourself for her, Elena?" Elena's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't waver. "Yes. I won't let you take her." The curse laughed, a sound that sent chills down Elena's spine. "So be it." With a final, decisive act, Elena drove the knife into the ground, sealing the ritual with her blood. The air around her exploded with a force that knocked her off her feet, the curse's presence enveloping her in a suffocating embrace. She could feel the darkness closing in, wrapping around her like a shroud. Her vision blurred, her body growing cold as the curse took hold. But in her final moments, she thought of Lily, of her daughter's bright smile and innocent laughter. She had done this for her, to keep her safe. As the darkness consumed her, Elena felt a strange sense of peace. She had fulfilled her purpose, and now she could rest. But as her consciousness faded, she heard one last whisper, a voice that chilled her to the bone. "This is only the beginning, Elena. You are mine, now and forever." And with that, everything went black. Elena awoke with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, the world around her a blur of confusion. Slowly, the room came into focus, the soft light filtering through the curtains, the familiar scent of pine in the air. She was in her bed, in her home. She sat up, her mind racing. The ritual, she had performed the ritual, hadn't she? The memory of the gas station, the knife, the blood, it was all so vivid in her mind. But now, she was back in her bed, as if nothing had happened. Elena glanced at the clock on the bedside table. It was morning, the sun just beginning to rise. She felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Had it all been a dream? Or had the ritual somehow worked, banishing the curse and returning her to her life? She got out of bed, her legs unsteady beneath her, and walked to the window. The woods stood silent and still, bathed in the soft glow of dawn. There was no sign of the malevolent presence that had haunted her for so long. Elena's heart swelled with hope. Maybe the ritual had worked. Maybe she had finally freed herself and Lily from the curse. She hurried down the hall to Lily's room, her breath catching in her throat as she opened the door. Lily was there, still asleep, her small body curled up beneath the blankets. The sight filled Elena with a surge of love and relief. She knelt by the bed, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. "Lily, sweetie, wake up," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Lily stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked up at her mother with a sleepy smile. "Good morning, Mommy." Elena smiled back, tears welling in her eyes. "Good morning, baby. How are you feeling?" Lily yawned and stretched. "I'm okay. Did I sleep in?" Elena nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes, but that's all right. We've had a lot going on." Lily sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Can we have pancakes for breakfast?" Elena laughed, a sound that felt almost foreign after the days of fear and tension. "Of course we can." As she made her way to the kitchen, a sense of normalcy began to settle over Elena. The nightmare of the past few days seemed to be fading, replaced by the comforting routines of everyday life. She busied herself with making breakfast, savoring the mundane task. But as the morning wore on, small details began to nag at Elena, pulling her out of her newfound sense of peace. The coffee pot took longer than usual to brew, the radio flickered with static between stations, and when she went to check the mail, she found the mailbox empty, a strange occurrence in a town where the mail was always on time. The more she tried to brush these things off as insignificant, the more they gnawed at her. The house felt different, too quiet, too still, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. By the time afternoon rolled around, Elena's unease had grown into a full-blown sense of dread. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the ritual hadn't worked as she had hoped. As she cleaned up the remnants of breakfast, her thoughts turned to the night before. The ritual had been real, she was certain of it. But if it had worked, why did she feel like she was still trapped in the curse's grasp? The answer came to her in a flash of terrifying clarity: she hadn't escaped at all. The ritual hadn't freed her from the curse, it had only bound her to it even more tightly. She was still trapped in its grip, living in a twisted version of reality where nothing was as it seemed. As the afternoon turned to evening, the oppressive sense of unease only grew stronger. Elena tried to keep herself busy, but no matter what she did, she couldn't escape the feeling that she was being watched, that something was lurking just out of sight. Lily, too, seemed to sense that something was wrong. She stayed close to her mother, her usual energy subdued. Elena could see the confusion in her daughter's eyes, the unspoken questions that lingered on her lips. "Mommy, why do you look so sad?" Lily asked as they sat on the couch together, a children's book open in front of them. Elena forced a smile, trying to mask the fear that was gnawing at her insides. "I'm just tired, sweetie. It's been a long few days." Lily frowned, her small hands gripping the edge of the book. "Are we safe now? Is the bad man gone?" Elena's heart ached at the innocence in her daughter's voice. She wanted so badly to tell Lily that everything was okay, that the nightmare was over. But she couldn't bring herself to lie. "I don't know, Lily," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I promise I'll do everything I can to keep you safe." Lily nodded slowly, her eyes wide with trust. "I know you will, Mommy." Elena hugged her daughter tightly, tears pricking at her eyes. She didn't know what the future held, but she would fight with everything she had to protect Lily. As night fell, the unease in the house became palpable. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, the darkness deeper. Elena could feel the curse's presence all around her, as if it were watching her every move, waiting for the right moment to strike. She checked the locks on the doors and windows multiple times, her anxiety building with each passing minute. The house, which had once been a sanctuary, now felt like a prison, a place where the curse could reach her at any moment. As she stood by the window, staring out into the night, she saw it, the same figure she had seen before, standing at the edge of the woods. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair that glinted in the moonlight. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She blinked, hoping the figure would disappear, but it remained, its eyes fixed on the house. She backed away from the window, her heart pounding. The ritual hadn't worked, the curse was still with her, and now it was stronger than ever. She had to get out. She had to take Lily and leave Pine Hollow before it was too late. But as she turned to grab her coat, the lights in the house flickered, and the air around her grew cold. A low, ominous hum filled the room, vibrating through the walls and floor. Elena froze, fear rooting her to the spot. She knew what was coming, she could feel it in her bones. The curse wasn't going to let her go. The hum grew louder, the lights flickering more violently as the air in the room thickened, pressing down on Elena like a physical weight. She could feel the darkness closing in, the curse tightening its grip around her. And then, as suddenly as it had started, everything went silent. The lights steadied, the hum ceased, and the coldness in the air dissipated. Elena stood in the middle of the room, her heart racing, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She waited for something, anything, to happen, but the house remained still, eerily quiet. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the room, searching for any sign of the curse. But there was nothing out of place, everything was exactly as it had been. It was then that she noticed the photograph on the wall. It was the same old photograph she had seen so many times before, the one of her as a child, standing in front of the gas station. But something was different. The photograph was no longer of just her, it was of her and a man. With silver hair and a cold, knowing smile. Elena's blood ran cold. She stepped closer, her eyes locked on the photograph. The man, Mr. Grey, stood behind her younger self, his hands resting on her shoulders, his eyes fixed on the camera as if he were staring directly at her. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and touched the photograph. The moment her fingers brushed against it, a wave of cold washed over her, and the room around her seemed to ripple, as if reality itself were shifting. The walls of the room began to blur and twist, the furniture melting away into shadows. The photograph on the wall faded, replaced by a reflection of herself, older, worn, and with the same cold, knowing smile as Mr. Grey. Elena stumbled back, her mind reeling. The truth hit her with the force of a freight train. She hadn't escaped the curse. She had become a part of it. The ritual hadn't broken the curse, it had bound her to it, making her the new vessel, the new Mr. Grey. The realization was almost too much to bear. She sank to the floor, her hands clutching her head as the truth tore through her. She had sacrificed herself to save Lily, but in doing so, she had condemned herself to an eternity of darkness. And the worst part was, she could feel the curse changing her, twisting her thoughts, warping her emotions. The love she felt for Lily was still there, but it was tainted, overshadowed by a cold, detached desire to control, to possess. Elena's breath came in ragged gasps as she fought against the curse, trying to hold on to the last shreds of her humanity. But the more she fought, the stronger the curse became, its icy tendrils wrapping around her soul, suffocating her. She knew what she had to do. She had to end this, once and for all, before the curse could fully take hold. With a surge of determination, she pushed herself to her feet and grabbed the knife from the kitchen drawer. The same knife she had used for the ritual, now her only hope of ending the nightmare. She stumbled out of the house and into the night, her heart pounding with fear and resolve. The woods loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, but she didn't hesitate. She knew where she had to go, back to the gas station, the source of the curse. As she made her way through the woods, the darkness pressed in on her, the shadows seeming to come alive with whispers and movement. But she didn't stop, didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. Not now. The gas station appeared before her, a dark silhouette against the night sky. The symbols carved into the trees glowed faintly, pulsing with the curse's energy. Elena approached the gas station, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the curse's presence all around her, its cold fingers reaching out to pull her in. She raised the knife, her hands trembling, and stepped forward. The curse seemed to sense what she was about to do, and the air around her grew colder, the darkness pressing in even tighter. But Elena didn't falter. She had come too far to turn back now. With a final, desperate scream, she plunged the knife into the ground, the blade sinking deep into the earth. The air around her exploded with a force that knocked her off her feet, the curse's presence enveloping her in a suffocating embrace. The ground beneath her trembled, the shadows around her deepened, and Elena felt herself being pulled into the darkness. But just as she thought it was over, the darkness began to recede, the curse's grip loosening. The symbols on the trees dimmed, the air grew warmer, and the gas station seemed to dissolve into nothingness. Elena lay on the ground, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had done it, she had broken the curse. But as she looked down at her hands, she saw that they were covered in blood, not her own, but someone else's. And when she looked up, she saw Mr. Grey standing before her, his cold, knowing smile etched into his face. "You're mine now, Elena," he whispered, his voice echoing in her mind. "Forever." And with that, everything went black. Elena awoke with a start, her heart pounding and her body drenched in cold sweat. The darkness around her was thick and suffocating, pressing down on her like a weight she couldn't escape. For a moment, she lay still, unsure of where she was or what had happened. Then, slowly, the memories of the night before came flooding back, the ritual, the gas station, the knife, and the terrible realization that she had become part of the curse. She was back in her bed, in her house, just as she had been the morning after the ritual. But something was different now. The air was heavy with an oppressive silence, and the familiar comfort of her home felt twisted and alien. She sat up slowly, her body aching with exhaustion, and looked around the room. Everything seemed normal, yet there was an unsettling stillness to it all. She could feel the presence of the curse lingering in the air, like a shadow that refused to leave. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Elena swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. The floorboards creaked under her weight, the sound echoing through the quiet house. She made her way to Lily's room, dread gnawing at her insides. She pushed open the door, holding her breath as she peered inside. Lily was there, sleeping peacefully in her bed, her small body curled up under the blankets. Relief flooded through Elena, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of foreboding. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was still terribly wrong. Elena approached Lily's bed and knelt down beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. Lily stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Mommy," she mumbled, still half asleep. Elena forced a smile, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes, sweetie. I'm here." Lily's eyes opened fully, and she looked up at her mother with a sleepy smile. "Are we going to be okay now?" Elena's heart ached at the question. She wanted so badly to tell Lily that everything was going to be all right, that the nightmare was over. But she knew that would be a lie. "I hope so, Lily," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I really hope so." Lily's smile faded slightly, and she reached out to touch her mother's hand. "I love you, Mommy." Elena's throat tightened with emotion. "I love you too, baby. More than anything in the world." She stayed by Lily's side until her daughter drifted back to sleep, her breathing even and peaceful. But the unease that had settled over Elena didn't leave. It clung to her like a shroud, refusing to let go. As she stood up and left the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that the curse wasn't finished with her yet. The days that followed were a blur of uncertainty and fear. Elena tried to resume some semblance of normal life, but the sense of dread that had taken hold of her refused to fade. The curse's presence was like a dark cloud hanging over her, always there, always watching. She went through the motions of daily life, making breakfast, getting Lily ready for school, doing household chores, but everything felt hollow, as if she were merely going through the motions in a dream. The house, once a place of comfort and safety, now felt like a prison, its walls closing in on her. Lily, too, seemed to sense the change. She was quieter, more subdued, her usual energy dampened by the weight of the curse. She no longer talked about the nice man in the woods, but Elena could see the fear in her daughter's eyes, the way she clung to her mother as if afraid to let go. Elena spent her nights in restless sleep, plagued by nightmares of the curse and the figure of Mr. Grey. He appeared in her dreams, always just out of reach, his cold, knowing smile haunting her every step. She would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, her heart racing with fear. She tried to tell herself that the curse had been broken, that she had done everything she could to protect Lily. But deep down, she knew that the curse was still with her, still waiting to claim what it had been promised. One evening, as Elena sat by the window, staring out at the darkened woods, she saw it again, the figure of Mr. Grey standing at the edge of the trees, his silver hair glinting in the moonlight. He didn't move, didn't make a sound, but Elena could feel his presence, could feel the coldness that emanated from him. She blinked, hoping he would disappear, but he remained, his eyes fixed on her with that same unnerving smile. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She knew now that there was no escape. The curse wasn't something she could run from, it was a part of her now, woven into the very fabric of her being. And as long as she lived, it would never let her go. The tension in the house grew unbearable, the oppressive presence of the curse suffocating Elena's every thought. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think of anything other than the darkness that had taken root in her soul. It was only a matter of time before it consumed her completely. She knew she had to leave Pine Hollow. It was the only way to protect Lily from the curse, the only way to prevent the darkness from spreading to her daughter. But even as she made plans to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. The night before they were set to leave, Elena received a letter in the mail. It was a plain envelope, with no return address, but the moment she saw it, her heart sank. She knew it was from Mr. Grey. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and pulled out a single photograph. It was a picture of herself as a child, standing in front of the gas station. But this time, there was no mistaking it. Mr. Grey was standing behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders, his cold smile fixed on the camera. A chill ran down Elena's spine as she turned the photograph over. On the back, written in elegant, cursive handwriting, was a single sentence. "You can never leave, Elena. We're bound together, forever." The words sent a wave of terror through her. She had known, deep down, that this was the truth, that no matter where she went, the curse would follow her. But seeing it in writing, in Mr. Grey's own hand, made it all the more real. Elena sank to the floor, the photograph clutched in her hands. She had sacrificed everything to protect Lily, but in the end, it hadn't been enough. The curse was a part of her now, and there was no escaping it. Tears filled her eyes as she realized what she had to do. She couldn't take Lily with her, not if it meant exposing her to the curse. But she also couldn't stay in Pine Hollow, where the darkness would only continue to grow stronger. There was only one option left. Elena stood up, her resolve hardening. She packed a small suitcase, leaving behind everything that tied her to Pine Hollow. She wrote a letter to Jimmy, explaining her decision, begging him to take care of Lily in her absence. She couldn't bear the thought of leaving her daughter, but she knew it was the only way to keep her safe. As she loaded the suitcase into the trunk of her car, Elena took one last look at the house, the place that had once been her home, now nothing more than a reminder of the darkness that had taken hold of her life. She got into the car, her hands gripping the steering wheel, and drove away from Pine Hollow, the town that had been both her refuge and her prison. But as she drove, the figure of Mr. Grey appeared in the rearview mirror, his cold, knowing smile haunting her every mile. Elena didn't stop driving until she was miles away from Pine Hollow, the town and its cursed woods far behind her. She pulled over to the side of the road, the car engine idling as she stared out at the empty highway ahead. She had done it, she had left Pine Hollow, left behind the curse that had consumed her life. But as she sat there, the silence pressing in around her, she realized that the curse was still with her, no matter how far she went. She could feel it in the air, in the darkness that clung to her like a second skin. She could see it in the rearview mirror, where the figure of Mr. Grey still lingered, his presence a constant reminder of the bond they now shared. Elena knew that she could never truly escape the curse. It was a part of her now, a shadow that would follow her wherever she went. But she also knew that she couldn't let it destroy her, not as long as Lily was safe. With a deep breath, Elena put the car in gear and started driving again, the road stretching out before her like a lifeline. She didn't know where she was going, didn't know what the future held. But she knew that she had to keep moving, keep fighting, keep searching for a way to break the curse once and for all. As she drove, the night pressed in around her, the darkness thick and suffocating. But Elena refused to let it consume her. She had faced the curse and survived, and she would continue to fight, no matter how long it took. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Elena was determined to find a way to free herself from the curse, to protect Lily from the darkness that had claimed her. And as the miles passed by, the figure of Mr. Grey faded from the rearview mirror, replaced by the light of a new dawn. Elena kept driving, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had lost, but her resolve stronger than ever. The curse was still with her, but it no longer controlled her. She was free, if only for a little while. And that was enough.